Hi, welcome back to Frank's Vinyl Review. Today we're going to be continuing our Jimi Hendrix series. We have reviewed the recent Jimi Hendrix Experience, August 18th, 1967. And we also reviewed last week the Jimi Hendrix Experience live at the Hollywood Bowl, 1968. And this week we are going to continue with the Jimi Hendrix theme in Los Angeles County, and this time this show was recorded live at the Los Angeles Forum in Inglewood, California on the 26th of April in 1969. So the previous two reviews, we were at the Hollywood Bowl. This show, Hendrix and his band have migrated to Inglewood at the fairly new Forum. I forget when the Forum opened exactly, but fairly new, a huge arena, and at this point, and I want to provide a little bit of context. The spring tour, Jimi Hendrix's, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, their North American spring 1969 tour, began on the 11th of April in Raleigh, North Carolina, and extended all the way through late June, June 29th in Denver, Colorado. I've listened to this tour extensively, bootlegs, audience recordings, live recordings. I know this tour very well. It's an amazing tour. I feel like this is probably some of the best music that Jimi Hendrix ever created. He and his band, specifically with Mitch and Noel, they had been playing together for roughly over 2 years. This was literally their peak. This would be their last tour together, but all the shows that they had played sort of culminated in this tour. And this concert is an amazing concert. And you hear me say that a lot. The last two Hendrix albums I've reviewed, but this one is very special. Jimmy was definitely on this night, and you can hear it in the music. He was very enthusiastic. But so before we jump into the concert, though, I want to just provide a little bit of context, because 1969 was a huge year for Jimi Hendrix. He didn't put out an album in 1969. His last album that was released was Electric Ladyland, and that had come out on the 16th of October in 1968. The record company, Warner Brothers, Reprise Records, the subsidiary of Warner Brothers, they knew Hendrix was a hot ticket. His record sales were very strong. Are You Experienced, Axis Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland all were selling very well. Reprise obviously wanted another record. And so really the idea was, Jimmy had played a European tour in early 1969 in January, and there were a couple shows in February as well. Some of the listeners out there, you may be familiar with those two February shows, the 18th and the 24th of February at the Royal Albert Hall. Those shows were recorded professionally. This show was recorded professionally, as well as an amazing May 24th, 1969 show in San Diego. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about that show at a later date, especially if Experience Hendrix LLC releases a live album, which I think they will eventually, of that San Diego May 69 show. But those three shows were recorded, and Jimi Hendrix, his team, his manager, Michael Jeffrey, they were really thinking about putting a live album together. So they had those Albert Hall shows, they had this show, and the San Diego 69 show. So they were wanting to put together a live album. And we'll circle back on that. That's going to be part of the discussion on this one. So this album, this record was recorded by Wally Heider, who did a lot of live recording for Jimi Hendrix. But wanting to provide a little bit of context, and just let's talk specifically the 1 week before this show. Okay, so the tour opened 2 weeks prior in Raleigh, North Carolina. The second gig was in Philadelphia, and there is an audience recording of that show. It's a pretty good show, actually. Hendrix Hendrix played at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. The next weekend he was at the L.A. Forum. So, Hendrix went from playing the Hollywood Bowl in 67, 68, and now in 69, the spring tour, he was selling out essentially the largest indoor arenas in the United States and Canada as well. I mean, the Spectrum, I think it's sat between 12 and 14,000. I'm not sure specifically, but these are big arenas. So that's what Jimmy was. The spring 1969 tour was mostly these bigger venues, if you will. So that tour started on the 11th of April, and then so the week after the beginning of the tour, Hendrix had a show in Memphis, Tennessee, and that was on April 18th of 1969. And at that show, he actually reunified with one of his old army buddies, Billy Cox. Billy Cox was a bass player. They had met way back in, I want to say 1960 or 61, maybe 62. I don't know the early years as well as the other years, if you will. But they met in the army, began playing bass, and if you've seen that movie, a film about Jimi Hendrix, Billy Cox talks about his first meeting with Jimmy. He was walking by a service club and he heard this guitar player. It was Jimmy. He introduced himself and they started hanging out. And subsequently they played in a band called the King Casuals. And it was, Jimmy and Billy and some other guys. So they had a pretty strong relationship. So, let's fast forward to 1969. So let's just say 6 or 7 years later, Jimmy invites Billy to the Memphis, Tennessee show. I believe Billy lived in Memphis at that time, and he was doing some publishing and perhaps still playing music, obviously playing music, but he had his own thing going. So Jimmy invited Billy to the show, and then they hung out afterwards. I believe Billy spent the night in Jimmy's hotel room, but essentially Jimmy, came dry with Billy and said, look, my creativity's running dry. After Electric Ladyland, Hendrix, we talked about the TTG studio sessions a little bit last time. There were, the Experience returned to Olympic Studios in London before the February 69 shows. But nothing really, there were a few good songs coming out of those sessions, but nothing like the creativity that Jimmy experienced before the release of Electric Ladyland. Although I would argue that he still continued to make some pretty incredible music. But essentially had reached out to Billy just in sort of a creative, he was in a creative rut, if you will. So he knew that reaching out to Billy, he could somehow, rejuvenate that creativity, if you will. So they hung out all night in Jimmy's hotel room. And the Memphis show was on a Friday night. So Billy Cox had arrived in New York City 3 days later on that Monday, the 21st, and they played together that whole week. So it's interesting that essentially, Jimmy brought Billy on. They started playing at the record plant, and Buddy Miles was playing drums with Jimmy and Billy. So Hendrix is doing this tour with the Experience. This was the last tour with the Jimi Hendrix Experience. But it's interesting to note that, in the week leading up to this LA Forum show, that Jimmy was already rehearsing and playing in the studio with Billy Cox, right? So the seeds had been sown for the band of gypsies that would come at the end of the year, and pretty much all of 1970. So this is really, I think, it's an extraordinary period for Jimmy, because he's reached out to Billy. Billy's in New York. They're playing at the record plant, and then on the weekends, Jimmy would fly out and do these concerts with the Experience with Mitch and Noel. So that's sort of the context behind this show. So I want to jump right into it. Okay. This was released last year by Experience Hendrix, and I've been waiting for this show for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have. This concert, I first heard this concert back on the Lifelines box set. A good friend of mine in high school bought me the Lifeline set as a birthday gift. I was a huge Hendrix fan. in my late teen years, that's when I really started getting into Jimi. So that Lifeline set was really amazing. I mean, it was, brand new, and a lot of the music that I had heard at the time was new to me, new to my ears, and even just the story. Like, there was a lot of narration in between the songs, and it was kind of interesting just hearing about the history. I mean, I didn't really know a lot about Hendrix at that time, so it was very informative and interesting. And one part of that box set, the Lifelines, they included this LA Forum show. It was an edited version. They had omitted Foxy Lady, but it was still cool to actually hear a almost full Hendrix show at the time. And that was from the Lifelines box set. So that's how I heard the show originally. I used to play that show so much. I mean, I literally had most of it memorized. So when this one came out, I was very excited to have it on vinyl because it's such a great show. So let's dive right into it. Jimi Hendrix at the Forum. So the record opens. There's an MC, and he says, "Let's make some noise. The Jimi Hendrix Experience. Let them know." The crowd's really into it. You can kind of tell when Jimmy and Noel and Mitch enter onto the stage, because you can hear the audience crank up a little bit. And then Jimmy says, and again, I love talking about the banter, because it's like we get to hear Jimmy as he's talking on stage. But he says, "Yeah, okay, we're all at church, all right? Pretend there's a sky above you, all right?" And then off mic, you can hear even what he's saying off mic, which I love about, I love this recording for that reason. He says, he probably turns to Noel and he says, "Oh, come on, let's get tuned up first, okay?" And then he comes back to the mic and he says, "This whole show is dedicated to you, ourselves, Murray Bowman, the Smothers Brothers, God bless their souls." And then he's fiddling around his guitar, he's tuning. And then he says, it'll take us about 45 seconds to get arranged here and for things to settle down, all right? And then he kind of goes into his sort of almost customary stage rap when he opened up a show, and he says, "And we want you to forget about everything that happened yesterday, last night, or this morning. Just forget about everything but what's going on now. It's up to you. It's up to you all, and it's up to us too, so let's get our feelings together." They talk about some kind of earthquake going on, dig. Where the earthquake happening is coming from. It's bad vibrations, man. They get very heavy sometime. If you want to save your state, get your hearts together. So he plays a few more riffs. You can hear Mitch kind of warming up. And then Hendrix again steps up and he says, "All right, to be fair with everybody, we're going to start off with a little jam, okay? It's a thing that was written by a couple of Swedish cats, Hansen and Carlson, and they recorded it in Sweden. It's a thing called Taxfree. But I think we'll call it, I don't know, it's just a jam. It doesn't make a difference. Go something like this here." And I just wanted to talk a little bit about this song, Taxfree. Hendrix had played in Sweden, and if I remember correctly, he met them in the fall of 1967, and he did record a studio version of Taxfree in the spring of '68. And when Hendrix played in the spring and early summer of '68 in the U.S., that was sort of the debut of Taxfree. He played it a lot on his first, headlining U.S. tour, if you will. So here it is. He's opening up this LA Forum show with Taxfree. So Jimmy comes in, he's strumming the first few chords, and then he yells out, "Tango's Mama," and then Noel comes in with a really cool opening pulse. And then Jimmy switches over to the melody, and he's just got this great, superb wah-wah infused lines. His strat sounds amazing. There's a really nice balance in this soundstage. Jimmy's already he's just so on. I mean, you can tell right from the beginning that he's on. It's going to be a great show. There's some, mini breakdowns here and there where Mitch kind of gets some space, and Mitch is on as well. And then they're playing along, and Jimmy starts quoting "Hear My Train A-Comin'." And "Hear My Train A-Comin' was a fairly consistently played song in 1969. So it's interesting that he quotes "Hear My Train A-Comin'" in this Taxfree. So he plays the melody, and he starts to solo off that. And then each passing bar, you can kind of hear it slowly morphing back into Taxfree, which I thought was cool. Hear My Train a Comin' though, it's a great blues song, and it was definitely a road horse for Jimi at the time. He goes back into Tax-Free, kind of restates the melody, and then there's another break that's kind of led by Mitch, and then Jimi takes flight. I mean, he's going on. He's playing rapid, single note lines. He's just really pushing it. He's really exploring. They lock into another groove. Jimi's still ascending, and then you can hear Mitch just thrashing really hard underneath, and Noel's playing very well as well. We get into some really nice feedback howls by Jimi, and again, Noel's laying down a nice pulse. And then Noel starts playing this kind of cool ascending line. Mitch again is just playing really well underneath, and Jimi locks onto something that he really likes, and there's just some more feedback, and then kind of drops off a little bit, and then we hear Mitch take a solo, and you can hear Jimi lightly touching his strings while Mitch is soloing. And I just wanted to mention in the Lifelines, like, they edited out Mitch's solo, so this recording sort of exposes more music than the Lifelines version. Mitch was still going at it. He was using a double bass on this tour, so you can kind of hear that sort of a double bass centric drumming, if you will. Mitch just takes a classic drum solo, and as I was listening, I was thinking of Mitch had his band idea, which was Mind Octopus. I think that's what he was thinking about for his band. Noel had his band Fat Mattress, and so the Experience had these side projects. But Mitch's drumming in this solo reminded me of an octopus, because all his limbs are going, and he's just playing really well. And then finally they go back into Tax-Free, and Jimi just is playing some really nice guitars. They come back into it. Again, this recording was recorded professionally, and there was, if I remember correctly, reading, I forget which book it was in, but there was like a 4D. They were trying something new with the sound in terms of the sound in the recording, and you can, I mean, it sounds amazing. So there's a nice ascending jam as they lock in to finish the song, and they really, to me at this point, they sounded like three horses galloping together, and they were just they were playing really well. They were definitely locked in. Jimi, this song, he was just doing a great job controlling his feedback with his tremolo bar, and he was just all over it. He's got some real nice dive bomb lines, and Mitch is still just crushing it. And then they end it, and just a powerful opener. I mean, probably a lot of people in the crowd were like, "What is this song?" It's not Foxy Lady, it's not Tax-Free. It was an instrumental, obviously an obscure instrumental from two Swedish musicians. So I'm sure hardly anyone knew what that was, but just a great version, one of my favorite versions of Tax-Free, mostly because of Jimi's amazing feedback manipulations. So we go back into some more of the banter. Jimi says, "Yeah, okay, man, okay," and then they talk about tuning, and he says, "I'd like to dedicate this one to somebody's girlfriend. We don't know who she is right now. We'll find out later on after the show." And then he does some more tuning. What I wanted to say about Foxy Lady was that it was not on the Lifelines release, because it had appeared on Jimi Hendrix concerts, which was before the release of Lifelines, and a lot of this music during the 1980s and early 90s was released under the supervision of Alan Douglas, who was kind of a controversial figure in the Hendrix canon, if you will. His reputation, I mean, he produced Charles Mingus and produced a lot of jazz records, and he, long story short, he met Hendrix and became friends with Hendrix, but somehow he, became the czar, if you will, of Hendrix's legacy for a while, for almost 2 decades. So, some of the things that he did were controversial. For example, on a couple albums, Crash Landing, and there were some others where he took original Hendrix recordings, wiped out all the tracks, the original bass and drum tracks, brought in other musicians and re-recorded stuff, and just things like that. I don't think Hendrix purists appreciated that, that he would do that, like erase tracks and stuff like that. But whatever. I mean, that's water under the bridge. So anyway, Foxy Lady was omitted from Lifelines because it had appeared on Jimi Hendrix concerts. That was in the literature and the Lifelines notes. So here we get to see Foxy Lady, and it's actually a really good version. So this I feel like this is one of the most requested Jimi songs. Whenever I hear bootlegs, you can always hear people yelling out for Foxy Lady or Purple Haze. So it's definitely one of the hits, if you will. And Jimmy's feeling it early. I mean, you can tell he's just in the zone. You can hear Noel with his background vocals, Foxy. The other thing I notice here, Jimi, there's some signature guitar licks in Voodoochild that Jimi plays, and he plays some of these in Foxy Lady. Like, for example, in the first position, he bends the D string very high, and it kind of has that Voodoochild feel, if you will. So Jimmy's in a good mode. He does some other cool bends. I mean, he's just howling in this version. Jimi drops into his solo, which is an album perfect solo. He's alternating between lower notes and bends. He's just playing very playful. And then right at the end of the song, Jimi sings, "Here I come, baby, I'm coming to do it to you." But when Jimi was having a good time, he loved Foxy Lady. Sometimes I feel like he probably didn't enjoy playing it, but he was definitely enjoying it this night. And then you can hear Jimi, he's using his mic stand. He's probably, he's slamming his guitar up to the mic stand and using it as a slide. I've seen and heard him do that a lot. And you can hear a little bit of some of that the Eastern lines that he uses. And just a really strong version. Great song to close side A. Flipping the record over to side B, we hear Jimi rapping with the crowd again, and he says, "Yeah, everybody wants to know what America's soul is. Everybody think it's Motown and all this mess. Everybody think it's that. They think it's the other. Yeah, America's soul goes something like this here, a thing called Red House." So Jimi opens up Red House, and the last version we heard from Hollywood Bowl '68, just an amazing version. So Jimi's back in L.A. He's rolling out third song of the night with Red House. He opens up with his customary intro notes, and then he shushes the audience. Like, he just played two really high energy songs, so the crowd is just amped. So he has to shush it. You can hear him on the recording. He goes, "Shh," and then he keeps playing a little bit. And then he says, "Yeah, okay, man, I'm sorry." So he's kind of apologizing if he had offended people. But this is Jimi's sermon, so he wants everyone to listen. He's so fluid, right? When this version opens up, this version of Red House, you can hear him saying "yeah." When he's saying "yeah" and he's playing some of the early sections of Red House, he's on. That's always a good sign. He continues to paint a pretty picture with some of those intro arpeggios. He's alternating with some really tasty blues runs. And I think on this one, we talked a little bit about this last time, he's still on his Strat. I don't think he switched over to the SG or the Flying V. It sounds very Stratty. Just killer bends into the first verse. He's just great tremolo, and and Jimi, always the improviser, even lyric, he says, "My pretty nappy-headed baby." He continues to dig in. He's got some great call and response. He's saying, "Oh, come on now," and just playing some really beautiful stuff. I mean, so this version of Red House is amazing. It really is, especially with this soundboard quality recording. So Jimi does some great call and response back into the second stanza. Just really beautiful stuff. He finally gets into his main solo after the verses are done. He's using more tremolo, just inspired lines. You hear some higher cries and screams, again on his guitar. Mitch is mixing it up as well, and you can hear Jimi say "yeah" and then they go into double time. So when Jimi yells "yeah," the energy picks up. They go into double time. Jimi's, again, more sonic bends by Jimi. Mitch is thrashing away. Noel's on point. Noel always sounds incredible on Red House. Jimmy literally is getting all he can from his Strat. He's bending the strings. He's really pushing the limits on it. There's, there's screaming, there's crying, there's howling, just incredible peaks. And then from there they segue into the sort of the jazzier breakdown, if you will. But really a nice tension and release. I mean, all that tension building up and then into the sort of the release of that jazz section was pretty cool. Mitch is always strong in this section, kind of showing his blue flame stylings, if you will. Jimmy's soloing a little bit slower, kind of feeling it around. And it's almost like, this concert is so intimate. Jimmy's guitar playing is so on tonight. There are many times in this concert where it's almost like he's in his room practicing, and you can get a sense of, how much he played, how much he practiced. Because even here, it's almost like he's practicing, right? Like you can. That's how intimate it is. It just sounds like he's in a hotel room practicing. He played a lot, so it's interesting that you kind of hear that. And then you can hear Jimmy say "everybody" this time, and then Mitch and Noel come back in, and Jimmy's got more passionate vocals as they head to the outro. Again, Jimmy's just really on. He's playing with tremendous bends and vibrato, and just a really strong version. And for Hendrix fans out there, May 24th, 1969, the San Diego version is arguably the best version of Red House that we have on tape. But this version is definitely up there. It's really, really good. So I highly recommend hearing it. And then Noel says, "Thank you very much. That was Red House." And then Jimmy quickly back into the mic. Here's one song we'd like to dedicate to the plainclothes police and other goofballs. It's a thing called Spanish Castle Magic. I think we should get into very quick before their minds deteriorate. And then, when he says that last line, I think we should get into very quick before their minds deteriorate. The last four words were sort of in a comedic tone. So Jimmy, always having fun, great sense of humor. And they go right into Spanish Castle Magic. And Spanish Castle Magic really was one of the great songs from 1969. Versions, I've heard a lot of versions from that year. And one of the versions from the 18th of February 1969 from the Royal Albert Hall. I managed to find a soundboard recording of that show. And he actually quotes Message to Love. So, again, he's sort of foreshadowing music that he would do in the fall of 69. Band of Gypsies, obviously, and then all of 1970. So it's interesting to hear these little fragments of future songs, if you will. So getting back to this version, they're just charged. They have this really strong opening. Mitch is just on. This is one of Mitch's killer drum songs. Again, Jimmy's hitting these I'm going to call them voodoo notes, but they have a similar sound as what you might hear in Voodoochild. And he drops into a really gnarly solo to begin. He's really charged as he swipes away, as he goes up into higher registers on his Strat. He continues to he's just playing higher and higher. Great sonicism by Jimmy. He's kind of transitioning a little bit. He's looking for chord. You can hear him doing chords and octaves, and alternating with single note lines. Mitch starts going to his cymbals more. And then Jimmy starts playing a little more patiently. He's listening to Noel and Mitch, so it's interesting. You can hear him, the music kind of settles down, and you can tell he's listening to everyone. Jimmy's got such a great tone off his Strat. This song, the whole show, his guitar sounds great. Mitch is continuing to hammer down. Mitch is going to his cymbals more. Jimmy's playing patiently and just improvising. Mitch is hammering down. At this point, Jimmy kind of goes into a solo, sort of a cordial improvisation, if you will. And he plays this amazing. So this is like just Jimmy. Mitch and Noel have dropped out, and then Jimmy goes into this freeform cordial jam, if you will. It's just him. And he plays this breathtaking chord sequence. It sounds really psychedelic. And that's the beauty of Jimi Hendrix. Obviously everyone knows about his lead guitar playing. He was an incredible rhythm guitar player. He could play a solo like this, and sort of morph into rhythm guitar, like these chord. He was like such a great chord builder. The stuff he was playing, this chord sequence, it's amazing. He's just crushing it, and it just keeps building and building. And then from there, it kind of turns into a Chuck Berry kind of riff cycle, if you will. And then, you know, it almost sounds like the music that we would hear in the Woodstock improvisation. You know, there's definitely hints of that. And this is where this recording gets kind of interesting. You know, like I mentioned some of the edits in the Lifelines version. Well, here the jam gets quiet, and we can almost, to me, I was hearing like almost an embryonic version of Hey Baby, a song that Hendrix would record in 1970, and Hey Baby would dominate his set list in 1970. So it's interesting that we hear sort of an embryonic version here. And then, you know, a year later, almost to the day, on April 25th of 1970, Hendrix opens his spring 1970 show at the LA Forum. And then at that show, we get to hear Hey Baby fully realized. But it's interesting to hear this embryonic version, in Spanish Castle Magic, almost like what we heard previously in February with the Message to Love in Spanish Castle Magic. So Jimmy's using his songs as springboards for improvisation, and then we're hearing, you know, future Hendrix tunes in these jams. So that's exciting. So Jimmy's laying down some more exciting ideas. You know, he's just so charged. They really pick it up again. He kind of, you know, he reprises the Spanish Castle Magic riff, so everyone drops in again, but then he just takes off again. I mean, he's so charged. He's playing another amazing solo. He's really picking it up again. You know, he's basically signaling to Mitch and Nola he's ready to take flight. Mitch responds, and then Jimmy reprises the Spanish Castle Magic riff, and then we hear some strong feedback, and sort of, you know, that's when the record fades out. But I just wanted to recap what an amazing version that was of Spanish Castle Magic. And Jimmy could have kept going. I mean, he's really in the zone. Okay, so side C, we're on to LP2 now, side C, and the record opens with the Star Spangled Banner. And I mentioned this on the last episode, the Hollywood Bowl 68 show, that Jimmy had debuted the Star Spangled Banner back on the 16th of August in 1968 at a gig. I want to say it was at the Merriweather Pavilion in Maryland, kind of near the Mason-Dixon line. So interesting choice there to debut the Star Spangled Banner. So at this point, he had been playing it for 8 months, and again, this tone. I just wanted to mention, you may have heard Star Spangled Banner and Purple Haze on the Jimi Hendrix Experience, the recent box set, West Coast Seattle Boy. These two songs are included in that. So Jimmy says, after From the Twilight's Last Gleaming line, Jimmy says, here's a song that we was all brainwashed with. Remember this, oldies but goodies? And so he's playing along, and he says, America. I think it's a beautiful rendition, right? And then he says, oh shit. And then after the line, the rocket's red glare, that's when we start hearing, the sounds of war, right? We hear missiles, we hear machine gun sounds, we're hearing some real carnage. And that's after that rocket's red glare line. Then he goes back into the melody. He's just got awesome control, excellent feedback. He's really in the zone, just really howling. And it's sort of a foreshadow of the Woodstock version. Obviously, every version that he played before Woodstock foreshadows that. But the carnage, the war would even continue to get expanded. Here, it's just kind of a brief series, if you will. And then Jimmy's howling, and they go right into Purple Haze out of Star Spangled Banner. So again, kind of foreshadowing that Woodstock epiphany, if you will. I love this version of Purple Haze. It's just really charged. Mitch is charged. And at one point in the lyrics, you can hear Jimmy say, "Excuse me while I kiss that policeman there." So again, he's improvising lyrics. It's interesting. He's funny that way. And then he improvises another lyric when he says, "Whatever it is, that headache put a spell on me," as opposed to whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me. On this one, he says, "Whatever it is, that headache put a spell on me." So just, again, Jimmy improvising on the fly. He's very much out in front in his solo. He's all over his Stratocaster. Mitch is very strong underneath, and we just hear more cries and moans, and Jimmy's got some great note placement with his solo. You can tell he's playing with his teeth towards the end. I mean, you can definitely, hear the enamel on the strings. He's playing some more of those cool voodoo bends that I've been talking about all show. And then he's really strong back into the main riff. Noel's having his fun, Noel's having fun with his vocals. And then there's just really crazy outro solo. Jimmy's just crushing it in every way. And he, again, plays more with his teeth. And it's a pretty strong version. I mean, you can really hear the energy in the forum. The song ends, and then Noel, I don't know if Noel's frustrated, but he's definitely getting affected by the people in front of the stage. His banter was more playful at the Hollywood Bowl, but maybe he was just tired, or but he sounds tired here. Noel says, "We should all sit down, because everybody get messed up or whatever." I mean, he's looking out for people, but there is sort of a tired, sort of frustrating tone in Noel's voice. And I mentioned Billy Cox coming into the fold earlier in the week playing bass. It's possible that Noel may have got wind of that. Like suddenly, Noel's only seeing Jimmy and Mitch on the weekends when they're playing gigs. He's not playing at the Record Plant, or he's not doing sessions with Jimmy during the week. So he, intuitively, he probably felt that something was changing. So then Jimmy comes back and he says, "Okay, we're getting some people uptight there, so let's just relax. Hold on a second, let's just relax and sit down. Let's get the rest of the thing over with, okay?" And then he says, "If you sit down now, we can play a little bit longer because I feel like playing. I don't feel like looking at these cats' blue hats." "Yeah, don't worry. Everything's going to be all right. Don't worry. We still got the end to come. Don't worry." And then he says, "Okay, settle down. We all feel the same way. So let's dedicate this one to the Smothers Brothers and to ourselves and to the American Indians. And this is called I Don't Live Today, Maybe Tomorrow, I Just Can't Say." So they go right into I Don't Live Today off the Are You Experienced album. And I want to say, I mean, in 1969, Jimmy played amazing versions of I Don't Live Today. I mentioned in the last video the Dallas, Texas 4/20/69 version. Again, that's my favorite version from '69. I recommend everyone listening to it. Hopefully you can find a version on YouTube or the Experience Hendrix's website, but I know it's out there. And I just wanted to mention the first version of I Don't Live Today I heard was from the May 24th, 1969 show, and that was a live version. It was included on the compilation Kiss the Sky, and that was my first ever Hendrix album. It's almost Christmas time, and I remember Christmas morning when I was little. I was probably 10, maybe 12, looking in my stocking, and there was Kiss the Sky, and it took me a long time to really, I listened to the first track, Are You Experienced, and then the second track was I Don't Live Today from San Diego, and it scared me. I could barely make it through that second song. So it took me a while to understand and appreciate. And then, in my teenage years, that's when I really became a huge Hendrix fan. But that Kiss the Sky, I just wanted to say how Kiss the Sky was my first ever Jimi Hendrix music. So that's what kicked it off for me. So we get into this I Don't Live Today, and Mitch is opening it up with his powerful drumming. And I love the mix on here because you can actually hear Jimmy, touching his strings a little bit when Mitch is starting to drum. So I thought that was kind of interesting. This song really has a bombastic beginning. The music kind of reflecting the lyrics. It's just really good. Jimmy takes an early solo. He's very strong out of the gate, just like this whole night. He's, really outside playing, and quickly back into the second verse, and then they ramp it up again. Liquid Jimmy returns. He's got a real psychedelic edge to his playing in this song, and literally the whole night. I mean, he's just on. The thing I noticed that I loved about this version is that he's playing his solo, and then he executes this ascending bend sequence, if you will. And it reminded me of the January 9th, '69 version, the Late Show. Those two shows were soundboard recorded in Sweden. But the second show, he opens up on the 9th of January, he opens up with I Don't Live Today. And he plays this amazing ascending bend sequence where he's, it's ascending notes, he's bending the strings, and so he tries to pull it off here. Not as good as that January 69 version. I recommend you guys try to find that, to hear that ascending series, if you will. It's just amazing. But it's kind of cool to hear him try it here. He's just playing with so much enthusiasm. There's more cries, and just his Stratocaster just sounds tortured in a good way. Mitch is very thunderous as well. And then they end that song and the crowd's going wild, and you can hear Jimi kind of tease Voodoochild a little bit. And then Noel at this point, he sounds really upset. He yells into his mic, "Why don't you all sit down?" And then Jimi comes back in. Listen, 1, 2, 3. Hey, listen, we'd like to say we understand how you feel. We want to do the same to you. We want to rush up to you and all that kind of stuff. But dig, listen to the sounds, man. We're trying to play some sounds, and we don't want all these jokers up here on stage with us, okay? And then there's almost, again, like the Hollywood Bowl, the police are there, and maybe some of the event organizers, they're talking with Jimi. And then at one point you can hear Noel say, "We got a new band," and then he kind of trails off. So maybe he got wind of Cox and Jimi playing. Again, he wasn't getting those calls, so he was probably sitting around in his hotel room wondering what the heck was going on. So Jimi talks a little bit up, he's letting everyone know that, they want to do Voodoochild. And at this point, again, it's like the crowd, it's almost like a reprise of the Hollywood Bowl, but I think that's true in every Hendrix show, right? I mean, from this point moving forward, these shows were just amazing, incredible energy. Hendrix definitely had a counterculture audience, if you will. So the atmosphere at his shows was very festive. And so you can definitely hear that. So right before Voodoochild, Jimi says, "All right, I'm very sorry, man. We wanted to play some more, but the cat said, if we keep pushing, and he's talking with someone, I don't know." But then the cool thing I love about this, he says, Jimi quotes on his guitar, he says, "Sit down, mother bleep, please sit down." You can hear it. I mean, so he's talking with his guitar. And then, I flip the record over. We're now on side D, the last side. And he says, "Okay, can we play Voodoochild for you?" So this is the last song. It's just a solid opening. As I mentioned in the Hollywood Bowl show, Jimi played Voodoochild second in that show. And then, it would evolve into a show closer, which is what we have here. So this version opens up very strongly. Jimi's alternating between the first position and he goes up to the 12th fret. That's where he's mostly soloing. The song's in the key of E minor, so the guitar players out there know what I'm talking about. Jimi's just in the zone. Again, he's been in the zone this whole show. He's got strong vocals. He's got a really hot solo out of the first verse, just searing lines. Mitch is firing on all cylinders. Jimi's mixing up with some trilling. He goes back into single notes. He's when he's bending notes and he's sustaining, you can hear him hitting his toggle switch, almost like the album version. He takes it down a little bit, and then we kind of, we hear that voodoo country blues, if you will, which he did. I mean, he would always peak it out early and then kind of bring it down again. At this point, the microphones were kind of malfunctioning. They do sound better than they did in the Lifelines versions, and I think Eddie Kramer was able to kind of, salvage some of that, if you will. But you can hear Jimi thanking God, and he's improvising lyrics, kind of scatting along, and he does some more voodoo bends, and then Mitch starts cranking. They really go back into some more high energy stuff. Jimi's giving his Marshall stacks just a tremendous workout on this night. Jimi starts playing this sort of ascending run, and Mitch and Noel pick up on it. And then Mitch actually gets another drum solo, and this is his second of the night after Tax-Free. The crowd's absolutely wild, and Mitch is really locking into it. You can hear Mitch hit his cowbell for a few measures. That's always kind of fun. And then Jimi introduces Mitch and Noel to the crowd, which I think is cool. And then they go right into Sunshine of Your Love. Just Mitch sounding very much like Ginger on some of his roles. It's really a great jam. Jimi takes it up an octave. He sounds great here. He's really primal. Jimi's in full flight. And then they kind of go into like a little bit of a funk jam, but it's got a harder edge. Noel starts playing some power chords, and Jimmy's picking up steam subtly. He's always morphing. His guitar playing is always changing. He starts hitting some chords, and then he starts alternating between single note lines and chords. And then he reprises the Sunshine of Your Love riff, and then they go right back into Voodoo Child. And then you can hear Jimmy say, "Thank you very much, thank you, good night." And then he starts, they're back in Voodoo Child proper. Jimmy starts ripping out some runs, and Mitch is cranking, and Jimmy's hitting these incredible bends, and just the notes that we sort of associate with Voodoo Child. Noel goes back to that ascending line that they had played earlier, and then they all sort of just crescend together. You can hear Jimmy again playing with his teeth before they end it, and he gets what I would call a tiger growl, if you will, and that's something that Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, some of their longer improvisations, like in The Other One or Dark Star from 1972, for example, people describe Jerry as having a tiger growl, if you will, and I feel like Jimmy, like on this version, and if you're familiar with the Berkeley 1970 version when he ends Voodoo Child at the end of the second set, he gets this growl from his guitar in the amps, and it's just kind of a cool way to end the show. So he gets that tiger growl, and he says, thank you very much," and then the amps are squealing, and then the record fades out, and that's the end of the show. So just a pretty wild, raucous Jimi Hendrix show from 1969. As I've stated, I definitely recommend this one. But out of the three that we've heard, I know in '67, I talked about some of the songs being embryonic, and I was really comparing those versions with versions from this album, because here we get to hear, almost every version they played is expanded, right? We get a 10, 12 minute tax-free. We get a fairly almost 10-minute version of Spanish Castle Magic. We get an extended Voodoo Child with Sunshine of Your Love back into Voodoo Child. I mean, so like the Jimi Hendrix Experience had expanded considerably. Their songs contained a lot of exciting improvisation. I mean, this is probably one of my favorite Jimi Hendrix tours, in that the Jimi Hendrix Experience, again, they'd been playing for over 2 years. They knew each other so well musically and off stage. They were really expanding the tunes. They had become springboards for improvisation, and we heard some of that in 1968 as well. But by 1969, things were just wide open, right? And the other exciting thing I like about this period, and this tour and this show, for example, is again going back to when Billy Cox flew into New York 4 or 5 days prior. So Jimi Hendrix was already switching gears, already thinking about the future, new music. Had probably written new songs with Billy Cox already. So it's like he's during the week he's playing with Billy and Buddy Miles, and he's getting this sort of creative charge, and then on the weekends he gets to go and play with his Experience, and sometimes we will hear snippets of what Jimmy's new direction was, right? We heard Message to Love in the February '69 Spanish Castle Magic. Here we hear Hey Baby in the middle of Spanish Castle Magic, and then subsequent versions, even Red House, for example. There's a bootleg from Jimmy's Baltimore 1969 version of Red House, and I believe he quotes Earth Blues. That's the one that was you can hear Jimmy quote Earth Blues and versions of Red House. So again, he's on this last tour with the Experience. They're playing incredible music, just amazing. And then in some jams you can hear Jimmy, he's playing and quoting things that he's doing in the studio during the week with some of his other friends and musicians like Billy and Buddy. They're just kind of coming through sometimes. So it's just a real exciting period. Again, they would end this tour in Denver on the 29th of June. And that show's a great show. It's an audience recording, but it opens up with a really, really good version of Tax Free. I mean, it's an audience recording, not as good as a soundboard recording. But it's just an incredible show, knowing that it's Jimi Hendrix, their last gig, Mitch and Noel, their last gig in Denver, Colorado. And so from there, they do the last gig, and Jimi continues to play with Billy, continues to sort of lay groundwork for the Band of Gypsies and all of 1970. He plays, he does some network television. He plays on The Tonight Show. I just want to keep it tight here with this concert. But in closing, though, I kind of want to circle back to, I think this is a perfect way to end it. We've got this show. I mentioned the Royal Albert Hall shows, in February. And then we've got that great May 24th, 1969 show. And again, Hendrix's management, they were making all these recordings because they wanted to produce a live album. So in June of 1969, Hendrix goes to L.A. He's with Eddie Kramer. They're in a studio out there. They're mixing. They're preparing a live album. I think it was over a weekend, in early to mid June. They go to L.A. Eddie's there. Jimmy's there. I don't know if Michael Jeffrey's there. He probably was or was not. But so they have the tapes from these shows. They've got the Royal Albert Hall tapes. They've got this L.A. Forum tape. They've got the San Diego tape, and they start mixing. They start putting together a live album. And then for whatever reason, and I think John McDermott explains this in his book, The Ultimate Experience, that they mixed some of the live stuff. They probably put together a track list, and then for whatever reason they just scrapped the project. So, I mean, I can kind of see why. Maybe because Jimmy knew the experience was ending, and he said, "Look, this band's over. Why do I want to put out a live album? We're not going to exist after this month." Me personally, I wish they had put it out. I think it would have been a great live album. The Grateful Dead, for example, they put out their album Live Dead. It was recorded in the spring of '69. It didn't actually get released until November. So I think if Hendrix had, and again, the record company was so hungry for a new product, right? They hadn't had anything new since Electric Ladyland. Electric Ladyland was probably still selling pretty well, but the record company was just wanting something new from Jimmy. So this new album was gonna, help that, and also, keeping in mind that Jimmy owed Capitol Records a record from his PPX dealings. It's a really long, convoluted story, but Jimmy owed a record to Capitol Records from a previous contract that he forgot about when he first, got on with Chaz Chandler. So in hindsight, when Jimmy and Eddie were mixing these shows for a proposed live album, that may have been for Capitol. But for whatever reason, that project got scrapped, and I really wish they had put it out. It probably would have been an amazing live album. And I mentioned the Grateful Dead because their album, that album Live Dead, it gets a lot of, and rightfully so. It's one of the greatest psychedelic albums of all time. But I think if Jimmy had put out a live album in '69, they were mixing in June. It probably would have came out in August or September of that year. It would have been just as good, if not better, as Live Dead. I mean, so it's unfortunate that album didn't happen. And sometimes, I'm sure a lot of Hendrix, it's like I have these shows, and sometimes I'll make a track list, just to, what would that live Hendrix album look like? Because the Royal Albert Hall shows, they had so much good music. Bleeding Heart and Little Wing, and just, an amazing version of Stone Free that showed up on the Jimi Hendrix concerts. There was just so much good material. This concert, the San Diego concert. So that would have been a double live LP. But instead, they ended up releasing Jimi Hendrix Smash Hits. And a lot of that music was recorded 2 years prior, so it wasn't really that new. There may have been some songs on it that had not been released in America as singles and appeared on it, like Remember, a different version of Red House, for example. So again, that missing Hendrix album, we don't really know. Like, there's nothing in the literature that talks about why the project was scrapped. Obviously, probably Eddie Kramer, he might know why. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask him in an interview. If Eddie, if you're out there, please comment why that live Hendrix album was scrapped. I'd really like to know. I mean, I think it's interesting for us to know why it was scrapped. I mean, that could have been an amazing live Hendrix album. I just wanted to know why. What was the thinking? Was it Mike Jeffrey who said, no, let's not do this? I just want to know. I'd like to know more why it was scrapped. Sort of the reasons behind the why. But at any rate, that's what we're going to end with. Thank you for tuning in this week and giving me a chance to talk about this great concert. This record is readily available. Highly recommended. It's a great concert, and you will hear Jimi Hendrix at his peak. And some great media here. Jimmy and Mitch and Noel I guess they were spending time on Warner Brothers lot. So there's great pictures of them on some horses, and I just wanted to show you some of the pictures here that are on the sleeve from that LA Forum gig. Jimmy, again with his white Stratocaster. He was just so on this night, and I think the pictures capture it beautifully. I mean, he looks pretty animated, he's having a good time. So yeah, I recommend it. I mean, here you can see him playing, he's smiling, he's having a great time. So you could tell, I mean, he was definitely on, and that wasn't always the case with Jimmy. I mean, sometimes just like all of us, he has off days, but he was definitely on this night. And there's another nice picture. There is some YouTube footage of this concert as well. It's pretty sparse and it's broken up and it's in black and white. But I have seen where someone painstakingly edited and was able to match up the soundboard with that footage amazingly. I mean, again, it's probably less than a minute or two, but it kind of gives you an idea of what it was like to see him there. So again, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe and like, and if you have any comments about anything we've discussed, feel free to leave a comment. I am looking for that 1970s show. I do want to wrap up this Hendrix in LA series, if you will, with that Jimi Hendrix bootleg. There are vinyl copies out there, just having a little bit of a hard time finding one that's kind of affordable right now. I actually have bootlegs of that show, but I really want to do the vinyl for Frank's Vinyl Review. So stay tuned for that. And I hope you guys have a great holiday, and thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thanks.